The Waiting Place, Chapter 1. My grandmother, Beatrice, was a woman whose hands were rarely still. She was always knitting, gardening, or, in her younger years, meticulously caring for the miniature world within the dollhouse that sat in her parlor. The dollhouse was an antique, a beautiful, intricate piece with tiny furniture, miniature dolls, and wallpaper that had faded with time. As a child, I was fascinated by it, spending hours creating stories within its tiny rooms. When my grandmother passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 88, the dollhouse was one of the few personal items she specifically left to me. I'm Clara. I'm 60 years old now, a retired teacher, living a quiet life after my husband passed away a few years ago. Inheriting the dollhouse felt like inheriting a piece of my childhood, a tangible link to my grandmother and the imaginative world she had curated within its walls. It sat in my living room, a silent, dusty reminder of days gone by. One rainy afternoon, feeling a pang of nostalgia, I decided to clean the dollhouse, to bring it back to life. As I carefully dusted the tiny furniture, straightening the miniature rugs, I noticed something unusual in the base of the dollhouse. A small, almost invisible seam in the wood. It looked like a tiny drawer, cleverly concealed within the foundation of the miniature house. My heart gave a little jump. A hidden drawer? In the dollhouse? What secrets could my grandmother have hidden here? I gently pressed along the seam, searching for a catch or a way to open it. After a few moments, the tiny drawer slid open with a soft click. It was narrow and deep, just large enough to hold a few small items. Inside, nestled on a faded velvet lining, were two things: a small, worn toy animal, a miniature velvet elephant with one ear missing, and a bundle of tiny folded papers, tied with a thin, faded ribbon. The toy elephant was familiar. I remembered it from my childhood. A tiny part of the dollhouse furniture, a toy for the miniature dolls. But it was worn, loved, clearly handled by small hands over a long period of time. The papers were small, folded neatly. As I untied the ribbon, the papers unfolded, revealing childlike handwriting, shaky and uneven. They were letters, written by a child, addressed to someone named Mama. The handwriting was difficult to read in places, the spelling phonetic. The words simple, filled with the innocent hope and confusion of a young child. Mama, is you coming today? I waits by the big tree. With Mr. Elephant, the sun is warm, but I is cold inside my tummy. Is you lost? I stays here. Like you said, I will be brave. Love, Lily. My breath hitched. Lily, a child, waiting by a big tree, with a toy elephant, waiting for her mama. A child left behind. I unfolded the next letter and the next, each one a poignant, heartbreaking message from a child named Lily, waiting for a mama who never came. Mama, it's raining today. Mr. Elephant is wet. I is wet too. A nice lady gived me a bread roll. Is you coming when the rain stops? I waits and waits. My feet hurts from standing. Love, Lily. Mama, a man asked me my name. I said Lily. He asked who I waits for. I said my mama. He looked sad. He gived me a apple. Is you mad at me, Mama? Did I be bad? I tries to be good. Please come back. Love, Lily. Mama, the sun went down. It is dark. I is scared. Mr. Elephant is not scared. He is brave. Like you said I should be. Where are you, Mama? Did you forget me? I will wait all night. Please come tomorrow. Love, Lily. The letters were undated, but the tone, the growing desperation, suggested they were written over a period of time, perhaps hours, perhaps days. The location wasn't explicitly named, only by the big tree. The toy elephant, one-eared Mr. Elephant, was her only companion, a silent witness to her waiting. Who was Lily? Whose child was she? Why was she left alone, waiting for a mother who never returned? The letters were hidden in my grandmother's dollhouse. Was Lily connected to my family? To my grandmother? The age of the dollhouse, the style of the letters, the faint smell of old paper. It suggested this happened decades ago, perhaps in the 1950s or 1960s. Who in my family would have been young enough to have a child Lily's age in that period? My mother? My aunts? The pain in the letters, the child's innocent confusion and growing despair was unbearable. A child left behind, waiting by a tree, with a toy elephant for a mother who never returned. The image was heartbreaking, a stark reminder of lost innocence and a devastating act of abandonment. My grandmother, Beatrice, had kept these letters hidden in her dollhouse. She knew about Lily. She knew about the waiting. What was her connection to Lily? Was she the mother? The grandmother? Was she involved in leaving Lily behind? The beautiful dollhouse, a symbol of happy childhood play, was now a repository of a heartbreaking secret, a testament to a child's pain and a mother's agonizing or perhaps unforgivable choice. I felt an overwhelming need to know who Lily was, what happened to her, why she was left behind, and what my grandmother's role in this tragedy was. Chapter 2.1. The tiny, heartbreaking letters from a child named Lily, hidden within my grandmother's dollhouse, had ripped open a wound in the past, revealing a story of a child left behind, waiting by a big tree for a mother who never returned. The worn toy elephant, Mr. Elephant, was the only tangible link to this unknown child and her tragic experience. My grandmother, Beatrice, had kept these letters and the toy hidden, a silent testament to a secret she had carried for decades. Who was Lily? Whose child was she? And what was my grandmother's connection to this story of abandonment? The raw emotion in Lily's letters, the innocent hope gradually giving way to confusion and despair, was almost unbearable to read. A child's pain, captured in simple words, preserved in secret for over 60 years. The dollhouse itself, once a symbol of my own happy childhood memories, now felt tainted by this hidden tragedy. Its intricate details, its tiny rooms, seemed to mock the reality of a child left alone in the world, waiting by a tree with a toy elephant as her only companion. I knew I had to find out more. I had to uncover the identity of Lily, the circumstances surrounding her being left behind, and her fate, and I had to understand my grandmother's role in this devastating story. Was she the mother who made the impossible choice? The grandmother who couldn't intervene? Or was her connection something else entirely? The letters themselves offered few concrete clues about the location, only by the big tree. Big trees are everywhere. However, the tone of the letters, The lack of sophistication in the child's writing suggested a time before widespread communication and easy travel, placing the events likely in the 1950s or early 1960s. I started by examining the toy elephant, Mr. Elephant. Was it a mass-produced toy or something unique? Its worn velvet surface, its missing ear, gave it character, a sense of being well-loved. It was a simple toy, but it was a tangible link to Lily. I also looked for any clues within the dollhouse itself. Were there any other hidden compartments? Any inscriptions or dates that might offer a hint? I meticulously examined every part of the dollhouse, searching for anything unusual. There were no other hidden compartments, no other inscriptions. The dollhouse itself seemed to have served primarily as a hiding place for the letters and the toy. My grandmother, Beatrice, was the key to understanding this secret. Her decision to keep these items hidden, her silence about Lily, suggested a deep involvement in the story, or at least a profound knowledge of it. I knew I needed to delve into her past, into the lives of her contemporaries, her siblings, her friends, to find any mention of a child named Lily, any hint of a secret, a disappearance, a difficult choice made in the past. My grandmother had 2 daughters, my mother, Margaret, and my Aunt Evelyn. Both had passed away. Did either of them have a child named Lily? My mother had me and my brother. My Aunt Evelyn never married and had no children. Did my grandmother have other children I didn't know about? The possibility felt remote. But given the hidden nature of this secret, I couldn't rule anything out. I started researching my grandmother's life in the 1950s and 1960s. Where was she living? What was her life like? Were there any significant events in her life during that period that might be connected to a child being left behind? I also looked for any records of a child named Lily born in that era, whose history might connect to my grandmother or her family. Birth records, school records, census data. Searching for a child with just a first name and a potential connection to my family was a daunting task. The most compelling connection remained the dollhouse and the hidden letters. Why did my grandmother keep them? Why did she hide them so carefully? It suggested a deeply personal connection to Lily, to the story of her abandonment. The location by the big tree was still a mystery. Was it a specific, well-known tree in a park? A landmark in a particular town? Or just a general description of a meeting spot? I decided to try and decipher any subtle clues in Lily's letters that might hint at the location. Did she mention anything about the surroundings? Any buildings, sounds, or other features that might help identify the place? Rereading the letters, looking beyond the simple words and phonetic spelling, I noticed a few details. She mentioned the sun being warm, implying it was daytime. She mentioned rain, suggesting the weather was a factor. She mentioned a nice lady giving her a bread roll, and a man giving her an apple, suggesting other people were present, or at least passing by. This implied a public place. Somewhere, people would be present throughout the day in different weather conditions. A park, a train station, a bus station, a public square, these were possibilities. The phrase "by the big tree" still felt central. Was there a specific big tree associated with a public place in a town connected to my grandmother's life in the 1950s or 1960s? My grandmother had lived in a few different towns during that period. I started researching parks, train stations, bus stations, and public squares in those towns. looking for any mention of a big tree as a landmark or a meeting spot. The search was slow and painstaking, requiring me to delve into old town histories, photographs, and maps. Many landmarks had changed over 60 years. Old trees may have been cut down, buildings replaced. The toy elephant, Mr. Elephant, felt like it held a clue, if only I could understand it. Was it a unique toy, perhaps handmade, or purchased from a specific place? Its worn condition suggested it was not new when it was left with Lily, that it had been her companion for some time. I looked online for similar toy elephants from the 1950s and 1960s, searching for antique toys, vintage plush animals. I found similar velvet elephants, but none with a distinctive missing ear or a design that felt truly unique. Mr. Elephant was a simple toy, made special only by the love of a child who held onto him during a time of devastating uncertainty. My search for Lily, for the truth behind her letters, felt like searching for a ghost, a child from the past whose story had been deliberately hidden, whose only tangible link to the present was a worn toy elephant and a bundle of heartbreaking letters in a hidden drawer. Chapter 2.2 The Fragmented Clues from Lily's Letters. By the Big Tree, the presence of other people, the mention of a kind lady and a man, suggested a public place, a location where a child could wait, hoping to be reunited with her mother. The worn toy elephant, Mr. Elephant, a silent witness to Lily's heartbreaking vigil, was a poignant reminder of her isolation. My grandmother's decision to keep these items hidden confirmed her connection to this story, a connection I was still trying to understand. My research into towns where my grandmother lived in the 1950s and 1960s, and the search for landmarks like a big tree in public places, was challenging. Many things had changed over 60 years. Parks had been redesigned, trees removed, buildings renovated. However, while researching the history of one particular town where my grandmother lived in the early 1960s, a town about an hour's drive from my own, I came across an old photograph in the Historical Society archives. It was a photograph of the town's Central Park, taken in the early 1960s. And in the center of the park, towering over the landscape, was a magnificent oak tree. It was a truly enormous tree, its branches spreading wide, providing shade and a focal point for the park. The caption beneath the photograph referred to it as the Centennial Oak, a beloved landmark in the town. The Centennial Oak, a big tree in a park in a town where my grandmother lived in the early 1960s. Could this be the location Lily wrote about? Could this be the big tree? The park in the photograph looked like the kind of public place where a child could wait, where people would pass by, where a nice lady or a man might offer a child a bread roll or an apple. The possibility felt chillingly real. I decided to visit the town, to see the park and the Centennial Oak for myself. The drive took me through familiar countryside, but as I approached the town, a sense of anticipation, a feeling of drawing closer to a hidden truth, settled over me. The town had changed, of course, but the Central Park was still there, and in its center, magnificent and imposing, stood the Centennial Oak. It was even larger and more impressive than in the photograph, its branches reaching towards the sky. A silent sentinel that had witnessed decades of life unfold beneath its shade. As I stood by the tree, looking around the park, the words from Lily's letters echoed in my mind. I waits by the big tree with Mr. Elephant. Imagined a small child sitting here, her worn toy elephant by her side, her eyes scanning the faces of passers-by, searching for her mother. The image was heartbreaking, a stark contrast to the peaceful scene of the park today, filled with children playing, families picnicking. Could I find any trace of Lily here? Any sign that she had waited here, that her story was somehow remembered, even after all these years? I visited the local library, the town hall, looking for any records that might relate to an abandoned child in the early 1960s, any newspaper articles, any police reports. The records from that era were often limited, especially for cases of child abandonment, which were often handled discreetly, without public fanfare, to protect the identities of all involved. My search in the official records of the town yielded no direct answers. There were no records of a child named Lily being found abandoned in the park in the early 1960s. It seemed that if Lily was indeed left here, her story, like so many others from that era, had been handled quietly, privately, perhaps by local authorities or social services, working discreetly with families involved. I decided to talk to older residents of this town, people who had lived here in the early 1960s, hoping that someone might remember something, any unusual event, any whispers of a child left behind in the park. I spoke to people at the senior center, at local cafes, at the park itself. Most residents had no recollection of such an event. The early 1960s were a long time ago. Memories fade. Or perhaps, I suspected, the town, like Port Willow in the previous story, had a way of protecting its own, of keeping secrets buried to avoid scandal or discomfort. Then, I spoke with an elderly woman named Agnes, the retired librarian, who had lived in the town her entire life. Agnes was knowledgeable and kind, with a sharp memory for the town's history and its people. When I mentioned my grandmother, Beatrice, and her connection to the town in the early 1960s, Agnes remembered her faintly, a quiet woman who lived here for a short time. When I gently brought up the possibility of a child being left in the park around that time, of a child waiting by the Centennial Oak, a flicker of recognition appeared in Agnes's eyes. Her demeanor shifted, becoming more reserved, her gaze distant. "A child," Agnes said softly, her voice low. "Yes, there was a story, whispers. A child found in the park, by the big tree, a little girl. So they said." My heart leaped. It was true. A child was found in the park, a little girl, by the big tree. "Lily, do you know what happened to her, Agnes?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Who found her? What became of her?" Agnes hesitated, looking out at the Centennial Oak, its branches swaying gently in the breeze. "She was taken in," Agnes said, choosing her words carefully, "by a family here, a good family. They didn't have children of their own. They gave her a home, a life." "Do you know the name of the family who took her in?" I pressed, the question hanging in the air, thick with the weight of decades of unspoken history. Agnes looked back at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and discretion. "They gave her a new name," Agnes said, her voice quiet. "A new life, to protect her, to protect them." The past, it was difficult. For the child, for the family who left her, for the family who took her in. She was reluctant to reveal the name, to break the code of silence that had protected Lily's story and the family who raised her for so long. But I had a right to know. Lily had a right to have her story told, to understand the choices made by the people who shaped her life. "My grandmother," I said, my voice steady. "Beatrice, do you know if she was connected to this? If she knew about the child being left?" Agnes hesitated again, her gaze thoughtful. "Beatrice," she said. "Yes, I believe she was here, around that time, and she knew. Yes, she knew about the child. It was a difficult time for her too, a difficult choice, for everyone involved." My grandmother knew. She was involved. The letters, the toy elephant hidden in the dollhouse, they were her way of preserving the memory of Lily, of the child left behind, of a difficult choice she was connected to. The mystery was slowly unfolding, revealing a story of a child abandoned, a secret kept, and a family's connection to a heartbreaking event that occurred decades ago, beneath the silent gaze of the Centennial Oak. Chapter 3.1 Agnes's Confirmation of a Child. A little girl, found abandoned in the park by the Centennial Oak in the early 1960s, and my grandmother's knowledge and involvement in this event sent a wave of profound sadness and a sense of unsettling revelation through me. The heartbreaking letters from Lily, hidden in the dollhouse, were real. The worn toy elephant, Mr. Elephant, was the only tangible link to a child whose story had been deliberately hidden, whose life had been profoundly altered by a moment of desperate choice. The difficult choice Agnes mentioned, the involvement of my grandmother, suggested a deeper connection than just knowing about a child found in the park. Was my grandmother the one who left Lily? Was she the mother who wrote those heartbreaking letters? Or was her connection something else entirely? A role in the events leading up to Lily being left behind? Or a role in the aftermath, in ensuring Lily was taken in and her story kept secret? The phrase in Lily's letters, "like you said," repeating Lily's mother's instructions to wait by the big tree, resonated with a chilling poignancy. It highlighted the child's trust, her obedience, her innocent belief that her mother would return. I needed to find out who left Lily and why. Was it a mother facing unimaginable hardship, a family facing a crisis, or was it a deliberate act of abandonment? A rejection of a child due to circumstances the family couldn't face. The identity of the family who took Lily in, the family who gave her a new name and a new life, was still protected by Agnes and the town's code of silence. I understood their desire to shield Lily, now a grown woman, from a painful truth. But the need to understand the full story, to connect with this hidden branch of my family tree, was overwhelming. I decided to focus my research on families in the town who had taken in a child in the early 1960s, a little girl born around that time, whose history might align with Lily's story. Adoption records from that era were often sealed, making direct access difficult. However, I hope to find clues in other records, in family histories, in the memories of older residents who might have known the families involved. I also needed to delve deeper into my grandmother's life in the early 1960s. Where exactly was she living in the town at that time? What were her circumstances? Was she facing any personal difficulties that might have led her to make a desperate choice regarding a child? I found records of my grandmother living in a small house in the town for a few years in the early 1960s. She was in her late 30s then, already married to my grandfather, with 2 young children, my mother Margaret and my Aunt Evelyn. It seemed unlikely that Lily was her own child, given her age and the presence of her established family. This suggested that Lily was the child of someone else, someone my grandmother was connected to. Was Lily the child of one of my grandmother's siblings? A cousin? A friend? The possibilities were numerous, and without more information, it was difficult to pinpoint the connection. The toy elephant, Mr. Elephant, remained a silent witness, a tangible link to Lily. Was it a unique toy, perhaps handmade, or purchased from a specific place? Could it hold a clue to Lily's identity, or the identity of the person who left her? I took the toy elephant to an antique toy expert, hoping to gain some insight into its origins. The expert examined it carefully, noting its age and its handmade quality. It wasn't a mass-produced toy, she said. It appeared to be handmade, perhaps a unique item created by someone with sewing skills. This suggested a personal connection, that the toy was made specifically for Lily, or by someone close to her. A handmade toy elephant. Could it have been made by my grandmother? Or by someone else connected to Lily? My grandmother was skilled with needle and thread. Was it possible she made the toy elephant for Lily? The possibility that my grandmother made the toy elephant, combined with her knowledge of Lily being left in the park, and her keeping Lily's letters hidden for decades, suggested a deep personal connection to Lily's story. The silence in the letters after the last one, the absence of any further updates from Lily, was heartbreaking. What became of her after she was found in the park? Did she grow up in the town, raised by the family who took her in, unaware of her origins, of the mother who left her, of the grandmother who kept her story hidden? I felt a growing urgency to find Lily, to share with her the letters, the toy elephant, the story of the child who waited by the big tree. She deserved to know her history, to understand the circumstances of her birth and abandonment, to know that her story, though hidden for decades, was not forgotten. Chapter 3.2 The Search for Lily, the child who waited by the Centennial Oak, was a journey through layers of hidden history and carefully guarded secrets. Agnes's confirmation of a child found in the park and my grandmother's connection to the event provided a framework, but the full story, the identity of Lily's mother, the reasons for her being left behind, and Lily's life after being taken in by the local family remained shrouded in mystery. My research into my grandmother's life in the early 1960s confirmed her presence in the town where the Centennial Oak stood. The possibility that she made the handmade toy elephant for Lily added a poignant layer to her connection to the story. But who was Lily's mother? Was she a close relative of my grandmother? A daughter, a niece, a cousin who faced an impossible situation? I decided to focus my research on young women in my grandmother's immediate family, who would have been in their late teens or early 20s in the early 1960s, the age of a young unmarried mother in that era. My mother, Margaret, and my Aunt Evelyn were in their late teens and early 20s in the early 1960s. Could Lily be the child of my mother or my aunt? The thought was unsettling. My mother's life, as I knew it, was straightforward. She met my father, married, and had me and my brother. There was no hint of a hidden pregnancy, a secret child. My Aunt Evelyn never married or had children. The possibility that either of them was Lily's mother felt remote, but given the depth of the secret, I couldn't rule it out. I also considered other possibilities within my grandmother's wider family? Were there any cousins or nieces who might have faced a difficult situation in the early 1960s that led them to seek help from my grandmother, perhaps leading to Lily being left behind? The absence of identifying information in Lily's letters, the lack of a last name, made tracing her identity incredibly difficult. The focus remained on uncovering the identity of her mother. The person who wrote the heartbreaking letters. The person who instructed Lily to wait by the big tree. I revisited my grandmother's other belongings, searching for any journals, letters, or photographs that might shed more light on her life in the early 1960s. On any young women in her life who might have been facing a difficult situation. I found old photo albums filled with snapshots of family gatherings, holidays, everyday life. I looked for any young women in the photographs who appeared to be pregnant in the early 1960s, or whose presence in my grandmother's life seemed significant during that period. The search was painstaking, requiring me to piece together fragmented clues from faded photographs and brief captions. I found photographs of family gatherings from the early 1960s, showing my mother and aunt, their usual selves, no obvious signs of pregnancy. However, there were fewer photographs of family gatherings from that specific period, a subtle gap in the visual history, which in hindsight felt significant. I also found a series of letters from a close friend of my grandmother's, a woman named Eleanor, who lived in a different town. The letters from the early 1960s spoke of my grandmother going through a difficult time, of a worry she was carrying, of something she couldn't share openly. Eleanor offered support and understanding, hinting at a problem that was serious and required discretion. The language in Eleanor's letters was vague, but the timing aligned with the period when Lily was likely left in the park. The worry my grandmother was carrying, the difficult time, were they related to Lily? Was she helping someone else? Someone close to her? Someone who was facing an impossible situation regarding her child? The complexity of the secret was growing, revealing layers of hidden pain and difficult choices. It wasn't just about a child being left behind. It was about a family's struggle with societal judgment, with the shame of an out-of-wedlock birth, with the difficult decisions made to protect reputations, and perhaps to ensure a child had a better chance at life, even if it meant a heartbreaking separation. The unyielding silence of the town, the careful protection of the identity of the family who took Lily in, suggested that revealing the truth would not only impact Lily, but also the family who raised her, and potentially other families involved in the secret. I felt a growing sense of responsibility to Lily, to the child who waited by the big tree, to the woman she had become. She deserved to know her story, to understand the truth of her origins, the reasons behind the choices that shaped her life. But I also understood the potential for pain and disruption that such a revelation could bring. My search for Lily continued, guided by the fragmented clues, the heartbroken letters, the worn toy elephant, and the growing understanding of the depth of the secret. Chapter 4.1. The investigation into Lily's identity and the circumstances of her abandonment was a journey through a carefully constructed maze of family secrets and societal silences. The letters from my grandmother's friend, Eleanor, hinting at a difficult time and a worry my grandmother carried in the early 1960s, strengthened the link between my grandmother and the events surrounding Lily being left in the park. The possibility that Lily was the child of a close family member, perhaps even my mother or aunt, remained a painful consideration. I decided to delve deeper into the lives of my mother and aunt in the early 1960s, looking for any subtle clues that might have been overlooked, any gaps in their personal histories, any connections to the town where the Centennial Oak stood. It was a sensitive area of research, exploring the hidden corners of the lives of people I had loved, searching for a secret they had kept buried for decades. I went through my mother's and aunt's old letters and photographs from that period, searching for anything that seemed unusual, any mention of a difficult period, any hint of a secret. The letters were typical of young women in their early 20s, filled with details of work, friends, social activities. But there was a subtle shift in the tone of my mother's letters in early 1962, a quietness, a sense of preoccupation, a brief period of time where her correspondence was less frequent. It was a small detail, easily missed, but in the context of Lily's story, it felt significant. I also researched the local hospital records in the area where my mother was living in early 1962, looking for any record of her being admitted around that time, any mention of an illness or a medical event that might be connected to a secret pregnancy or a difficult birth. Accessing medical records from that era was challenging due to privacy regulations, but I hope to find some non-identifying information that might shed light on that period of her life. While researching, I came across a record of my mother, Margaret Vance, being admitted to a hospital in a nearby city in April 1962, suffering from a severe fever and complications. The record was brief, but it indicated a period of hospitalization and recovery. April 1962. The fever, the hospitalization, my mother. Could this be connected to Lily? Could Lily have been born in April 1962? The letters from Lily were undated, but the simplicity of her writing suggested a child of 4 or 5 years old. If she was born in April 1962, she would have been around 4 years old in the spring of 1966, a plausible age for a child to write those letters with that level of phonetic spelling and simple sentence structure. The timing of my mother's hospitalization in April 1962, coinciding with the potential birth of Lily and the difficult time my grandmother was going through around that period, as mentioned in Eleanor's letters, felt increasingly significant. Was Lily my mother's child? Was she born in secret, due to a difficult or traumatic birth during my mother's illness? Was my grandmother involved in the secrecy, perhaps helping my mother conceal the pregnancy and birth due to the complications and the fear of scandal? The pieces of the puzzle were slowly coming together, forming a devastating picture of a secret birth, a difficult choice made by my mother, and a cover-up orchestrated by my grandmother and perhaps others, all to protect the family from shame and to ensure Lily had a chance at a stable life, even if it meant being separated from her biological mother. The silence surrounding my mother's hospitalization in 1962, the lack of details in family stories, the vague references to her being sick, it all made sense now. It was a period deliberately shrouded in secrecy to conceal the truth of Lily's birth. The heartbreak of Lily's letters, her innocent hope giving way to despair, took on a new, agonizing meaning. She was not just a child left behind by an unknown mother. She was the daughter of my own mother, left waiting by a tree, while my mother, perhaps recovering from a difficult birth, was unable to return for her. The complexity of the secret was immense. It involved not just a child given up for adoption, but a secret birth, a cover-up, and a mother's agonizing choice influenced by illness and societal pressures. I felt a profound sense of sorrow for my mother, for the difficult circumstances she faced, for the impossible choice she was forced to make, for the secret she carried throughout her life. And I felt a growing urgency to find Lily, my half-sister, the child who was born in secret, the child whose story was hidden for decades, the child who waited by the big tree. Chapter 4.2. The overwhelming evidence pointing to my mother, Margaret Vance, as Lily's biological mother, to a secret birth during her hospitalization in April 1962, and to my grandmother's involvement in the cover-up, brought a wave of profound sadness and a sense of rewriting my entire family history. The woman I knew as my quiet, reserved mother had carried a monumental secret, a secret that began with a difficult and perhaps traumatic birth and ended with the heartbreaking decision to leave her daughter behind, to give her a chance at a better life. The letters from Lily, the child waiting by the Centennial Oak, were now a poignant testament to my mother's pain, her impossible choice, and the devastating impact of her actions or inactions on her own child. Lily's words, filled with innocent hope and growing despair, were a direct link to a moment of profound human tragedy and a mother's silent suffering. My search for Lily, my half-sister, intensified. She was likely given a new name by the family who took her in, her identity carefully protected. The town's code of silence, the reluctance of older residents to reveal the name of the family who raised her, became a formidable barrier. But I was armed with new information. Lily was born in April 1962, likely in or near the town where my mother was hospitalized. She was left in the park in the spring of 1966 at the age of 4, waiting by the Centennial Oak. She was taken in by a local family in that town, a family who didn't have children of their own. I revisited the town with the Centennial Oak, armed with this new information. I spoke again with Agnes, the retired librarian, sharing with her the truth I had uncovered about my mother, about Lily's birth in 1962, about her being left in the park at the age of 4 in 1966. Agnes listened, her eyes filled with compassion. The pieces of the story I shared aligned with the vague whispers and the carefully guarded secrets she had known for decades. When I gently brought up the identity of the family who took Lily in, explaining my need to connect with my half-sister, to share with her the truth of her origins, Agnes hesitated. She understood the sensitivity of the situation, the potential for pain and disruption that such a revelation could bring to Lily and the family who raised her. "They were good people, Clara," Agnes said softly. "They loved that little girl like she was their own. They gave her a good life, a life free from the difficulty." She confirmed that the family was from the town, a respected family who, for reasons of their own, had been unable to have children. Their decision to take in Lily was an act of kindness, of compassion, but it was also shrouded in the secrecy of the time, a secret they guarded carefully to protect Lily and themselves. "Do you know their name, Agnes?" I asked again, my voice filled with both hope and trepidation. "The name of the family who raised Lily." Agnes looked at me, her gaze steady, assessing. She saw the earnestness in my eyes, the deep need to connect with the sister I never knew I had. She sighed a long, weary sound. "The family," Agnes said, her voice quiet, was the Millers, Thomas and Mary Miller. They lived just on the edge of town. He was a carpenter. She was a seamstress. Good, decent people. The Millers, Thomas and Mary Miller. The names resonated faintly, familiar but distant. Thomas Miller, a carpenter. My grandfather, my mother's father, was a carpenter. A chilling possibility began to form in my mind. Could Thomas Miller, the carpenter from the town, be related to my grandfather? Was he a cousin? An uncle? Was the family who raised Lily connected to my own family tree in a way I hadn't realized? I searched for information about Thomas and Mary Miller, the family who raised Lily, focusing on their connection to my Vance family. I found records confirming that Thomas Miller was indeed a distant cousin of my grandfather, a branch of the family that had settled in this town generations ago. The family who raised Lily, who gave her a new name and a new life, was related to me. The web of family connections, of hidden histories and intertwined lives, was far more intricate than I had ever imagined. My grandmother, Beatrice, knew the Millers. They were family. Was she involved in arranging for Lily to be taken in by them? Was it a decision made within the wider family circle? A way of keeping Lily close, while burying her story from the main branch of the family, from me? The truth was unfolding, layer by layer, revealing not just a story of a child left behind, but a complex narrative of a family's struggle with secrets, with difficult choices, and with the enduring impact of past actions on present lives. Chapter 5.1. The revelation that the family who raised Lily, the Millers, were distant cousins of my own family, added another layer of complexity and a poignant twist to the hidden history. It meant that Lily, my half-sister, had been raised by relatives, by a family connected to my own, a decision perhaps orchestrated by my grandmother and other family members to keep Lily within the family circle while burying her story from the main branch, from me. Thomas and Mary Miller, the kind, decent people who gave Lily a home and a new life, had kept the secret, raising her as their own, honoring the difficult arrangement made in the shadows of 1966. They had given her a stable upbringing, a life filled with love, a life free from the shame and hardship her biological mother faced. Their act was one of immense compassion and sacrifice, a testament to their character. My task now was to find Lily, the woman who was once the child who waited by the Centennial Oak, the woman who was my half-sister, raised by distant cousins, unaware of her true origins, unaware of the mother who left her behind, unaware of the family she was unknowingly connected to. Agnes, the retired librarian, with her deep knowledge of the town's history and its people, was instrumental in helping me find information about Lily's life after she was taken in by the Millers. Agnes confirmed that Lily grew up in the town, a quiet, kind girl loved by her adoptive parents. She attended local schools, married a local man, and had a family of her own. She still lived in the town, now an older woman with children and grandchildren. Her name was now Lily Miller Peterson. Lily Miller Peterson, my half-sister, living a life just a few hours away. In the town where she was left behind, unaware of the hidden threads that connected her to me, to our mother, to a past she never knew existed. Reaching out to Lily felt like the culmination of a long and emotionally challenging journey. I was about to introduce a truth that would undoubtedly shatter her understanding of her own life, her family history, her identity. It was a profound responsibility. a delicate unveiling of a past that had been deliberately concealed for decades. I decided to write her a letter first, a gentle introduction to the possibility of a shared, hidden history. I introduced myself as Clara Davis, a relative from her adoptive family's side, researching family history. I mentioned finding old documents that hinted at a connection to her family, the Millers, and to events in Port Willow in 1966 involving a child named Lily. I explained that my research suggested she might be that Lily, and that there was a significant, previously unknown part of her family history related to a woman named Margaret Vance. I included copies of Lily's letters from the Dollhouse, the heartbreaking messages to her mother, and the photograph of the toy elephant, Mr. Elephant, a tangible link to her childhood, hoping they would resonate with a sense of familiarity, of a forgotten past. I emphasized that I wasn't looking for anything, only to share a truth that had been hidden for a long time, to honor the lives involved, and to connect with a hidden branch of our family tree, if she was open to it. I included my contact information. Sending the letter felt like sending a message across a lifetime of silence and buried secrets. The waiting period was filled with intense anxiety and anticipation. How would she react to the news that the life she had known was built on a foundation of secrecy? Would she believe me? Would she be angry? Or would she be open to hearing about a past she never knew existed? Then, one afternoon, my phone rang. An unknown number from an area code in that town. My heart pounded. I took a deep breath and answered. "Hello? Is this Clara Davis?" The voice was female, older, with a quiet uncertainty. "Yes," I said, my voice trembling. "This is Clara Davis." "My name is Lily Miller Peterson," she said. I received your letter about the letters and the elephant." It was her, Lily, the child who waited by the big tree, the woman whose story had been hidden for decades. Chapter 5.1. The voice on the other end of the line belonged to Lily Miller Peterson, the woman whose life began with a heartbreaking choice and a secret hidden for decades. Hearing her voice, the woman who was once the child who wrote those poignant letters from the Dollhouse, was a moment of profound emotional impact. It was her, finally, a tangible presence, a life lived, a story waiting to be fully told. We talked for a long time that first call, and in many conversations that followed. Lily's voice was filled with a mixture of disbelief, confusion, and a deep sadness as she processed the information in my letter. She had known she was adopted, but the details were always vague. Her adoptive parents, Thomas and Mary Miller, were kind and loving, but they had shared limited information about her early life or her biological family. The letters from the Dollhouse, the heartbreaking messages to her mother, the photograph of the worn toy elephant, Mr. Elephant. These were pieces of a forgotten past that resonated with a strange, unsettling familiarity. She shared her life story with me. Growing up in a loving home with the Millers, her life in the town, her marriage, her family. She had had a good life, a stable life, a life filled with love and security. But there had always been unanswered questions about her origins, a sense of a missing piece of her identity. My letter had provided those answers, in ways she could never have anticipated. The truth was painful, revealing a history of a mother forced to give her up, a moment of abandonment under the watchful gaze of the Centennial Oak. A secret kept by the town, and by the family who raised her. But it was also a truth that brought clarity, a sense of understanding the roots of her life, the reasons behind the unanswered questions she had carried for so long. We decided to meet in person. Lily traveled to my town. Seeing her step out of the car, an older woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile, the woman who was once the child who waited by the big tree, was deeply moving. There was a quiet strength about her, a resilience forged in the crucible of a past she didn't remember, a past that had shaped her life in profound ways. We spent time together, sharing stories of our lives, of the mother we both knew in different ways. My mother, Margaret Vance, the biological mother who made the agonizing choice. Her adoptive mother, Mary Miller, the woman who raised her with love and compassion. We looked at photographs, photos of my mother as a young woman, photos of the Millers, photos of Lily growing up. The pieces of the story, once fragmented and hidden, were finally coming together, forming a complete, albeit heartbreaking, narrative. Lily was grappling with the reality of her biological mother, the woman who had made an impossible choice, the woman who had written those heartbreaking letters, the woman who had carried the burden of her secret and her pain for decades. There was sadness, a sense of loss for the connection she never had, but also an understanding of the difficult circumstances her mother must have faced. She expressed immense love and gratitude for the Millers, the parents who raised her, who gave her a life filled with love and stability. The knowledge that they were not her biological parents didn't diminish her love for them. It simply added a layer of understanding to the unique bond they shared. The toy elephant, Mr. Elephant, held a special significance for Lily. She remembered a toy elephant from her early childhood, a blurry memory. But the photograph from the dollhouse resonated with a deep, almost subconscious familiarity. Holding the worn velvet toy, a tangible link to the child she once was, a child waiting by a big tree, brought a wave of emotion, a connection to a past she didn't consciously remember, but that was deeply embedded in her being. Our relationship, as half-siblings, was new, but it was rooted in a shared history that ran deeper than a lifetime. We were two halves of a story, brought together by a mother's secret and a daughter's relentless search for truth. We were family, connected by blood and by the intricate web of choices and secrets that had shaped our lives. Chapter 5.2: The journey that began with a hidden drawer in a dollhouse and a bundle of heartbreaking letters had led to the uncovering of a profound family secret. A story of a child left behind, a mother's impossible choice, and the enduring impact of the past on the present. Finding Lily, my half-sister, the woman who was once the child who waited by the Centennial Oak, brought a sense of completion to a story that had been shrouded in secrecy for over 60 years. Lily, now in her 60s, was navigating the complex emotions of discovering her true origins. She loved the parents who raised her, the Millers of Port Willow, with an unwavering devotion. And knowledge that they were not her biological parents didn't diminish her gratitude or her love for them. It simply added a layer of understanding to the unique bond they shared. She was also processing the story of her biological mother, Margaret Vance. My mother, the woman who had carried her, given birth to her, and then made the heartbreaking choice to leave her behind, to give her a chance at a life she felt unable to provide alone. The unsent letters from the dollhouse, a tangible piece of her mother's pain and love, were a precious link to her, a window into the impossible choice she faced. Our relationship as half-siblings was new, but it was rooted in a shared history that ran deeper than a lifetime. We were two halves of a story, brought together by a mother's secret and a daughter's relentless search for truth. We spent time together, sharing stories of our lives, of the mother we both knew in different ways, of the paths our lives had taken. There was a sense of finding a missing piece, of a puzzle finally completed. The town of Port Willow, the Centennial Oak, the park, they were no longer just locations in a hidden story. They were places with profound personal significance for Lily. Returning to the park, standing by the Centennial Oak, the tree that had witnessed her waiting, was a deeply emotional experience for her. It was a way of connecting with the child she once was, of acknowledging the pain and the resilience of that moment. The dollhouse, once a symbol of my own happy childhood, now held a deeper, more complex meaning. It was a repository of a heartbreaking secret, a testament to a child's pain and a mother's impossible choice. But it was also a symbol of connection, of a hidden history that had ultimately brought two siblings together. Two halves of a story finally united. The letters, the toy elephant, they were no longer just relics of the past. They were tangible links to Lily's origins, pieces of her story that she could hold, that she could share with her own children and grandchildren. The complexity of the secret, the difficult choices made by my mother, by my grandmother, by the Millers, by the community of Port Willow, it all highlighted the unforgiving nature of the past and the lengths to which people would go to protect reputations and to ensure a child had a chance at a better life, even if it meant a heartbreaking separation. My life, which began with a grandmother's dollhouse and a hidden secret, had been profoundly changed. I had uncovered a hidden branch of my family tree, connected with a half-sister I never knew existed, and gained a deeper understanding of the intricate ways lives are shaped by love, loss, secrets, and the unpredictable hand of fate. The heartbreaking letters from the dollhouse had ultimately brought two siblings together, two halves of a story finally united. A reminder that even when children are left behind, their stories, their lives are not forgotten, and truth, however long it takes, has a way of finding its way home. The waiting place, the Centennial Oak, was no longer just a place of past pain. It was a place of connection, of understanding, and of a family finding its way back to a form of wholeness, embracing the hidden branches of our tree and the lives that were lived in the shadows, brought into the light by the enduring power of a child's words and a sister's search.